An excerpt from one of my own stories entitled, "These Things Happen." It weren't no ordinary cry for help. The first holler was shrill, perhaps laced with shock, but the second was more full, brawn, and collected even. Be that as it may, it still sent a wet shiver down the backbone. "Mitch!" Ben hollered, followed again with another. Mitchell arrived at the screen door in time for the next, and glared through its hardened twine, caked with ages of dirt. He saw his dad far off on foot beside the cornfield, staring at the ground, arms lifted just off the waist and palms due south. And if Mitchell's eyes were not deceiving him, his dad's jaw seemed lowered too. "Mitchell!" Ben belted out again. Mitchell burst through the screen door and onto the porch, a good swirl of dust escaping the door frame when it slammed back shut. The morning was already warm and carried with it a thin, crisp breeze beneath a cloudy but shadeless sky. The grass was dry and crunched as Mitchell's shoes sunk into it, and he squinted from the harsh light now mounted over the top of the farmhouse. He looked up as he ran towards his dad, seeing him now pace about in the open field that he had been plowing all morning, with one hand now on the back of his neck, and the other violently removing his hat from his head, very clearly stressing. He made his way back and forth between the cornfield and the pale green sun-eaten tractor he had been on since early morning. "Hurry it on up, Mitch!" Ben shouted. Mitchell livened his step, which wasn't easy now that he had made his way past the rim of the half-plowed field. Each thick patch of mounded soil now took hold of his feet, making running a little more of a chore, but he kept at it briskly. He could now hear that the tractor's engine was still running, its hum polluting an otherwise quiet start of the day. Mitchell thought it odd and for a moment questioned why his dad would so abruptly jump off the machine and not even bother to turn the ignition off. But this thought soon replaced the oddity with worry. Something had his dad rattled good, and at this point it wasn't just fatigue burning in Mitchell's stomach. He arrived, short of breath, stopping just shy of where his dad stood, and while the trail of dust he had kicked up during his run began to drift its way past him, he bent over, placing his hands on his knees to collect himself, and upon doing so found himself met with the same startling discovery his dad had made. At first, words were not exchanged, for now there would only be silence. Ben walked over to Mitchell and stood just behind him, eyes peering over his stiff, drooping right shoulder, the both of them bewildered and both unsure who would speak first. As Mitchell stared down at the ground, all surrounding sounds became faint to him, even the hum of the old tractor. It was almost funny. Mitchell could hardly hear the now soft-spoken engine, and yet it still managed to cross his mind that it was alive and vibrating. He was aware that its roar had gone dim, but it did nothing to bring that roar back. The moment should have been stolen away by the sight before him, and though it had him in a nearly neck-deep hypnotic trance, a decent portion of him, even though mentally miles away, was still running that tractor's thin hum through his thoughts. Funny how that was, and even more so that Mitchell had this on his mind at such an inopportune time. What lay before them? Well, the answer was not in full yet. From what could be seen, though, there on the ground in front of the two of them was a partial boot, and without a doubt, there also resided a foot inside, the surety coming from the ankle that could also be seen. From in the soil, a brown leather boot with only inches of its heel buried, and a clothed ankle rest atop the ground as if unearthed only recently. It was at this time that Ben spoke first. "I was plowing," he managed to choke up, his words dry and from an even drier throat. Ben swallowed, inhaled slightly, and spoke again. "I was plowing, and I seen it in the rear view." A couple more moments made themselves present before Mitchell answered back, and without moving a single muscle outside his jaw, he replied, "You uncovered it just now? With the plow?" Ben took a step back, throwing his hat to the ground, the dirt sticking to its white, sweat-soaked rim. "Yeah, I sure did," Ben said, his voice in fits. Mitchell then slowly rose up again. his knees appearing weaker than before, and with his eyes fixed on something else now. Ben rubbed his warm scalp, feeling the sweat hardening under his hair. "You think there is more to him?" he said. "Under all the dirt? You think there's more?" Mitchell exhaled and rolled his tongue around the inside of his bottom lip. He then took a small step forward, as well as carefully as not to disturb the day's unexpected little discovery. Only to bend back down again, he planted one hand upon the ground, and with the other he removed his now greasy straw hair from his eyes and back behind one ear, saying aloud and yet partially to himself, "Are those fingers?" Ben, without much hesitation at all, stepped forward. He saw before Mitchell 2, maybe just barely 3, edges of what very much looked like bone coming up from the dirt. Alright, thank you kindly for listening to the entire thing. Opinions welcome.